Usually when we think about a legendary rock band, there's this ingrained expectation of brotherhood.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like looking at a street gang, right?
Yeah.
You see four guys standing against a brick wall in matching leather jackets, identical bowl cut haircuts, sharing the exact same last name, and you just assume that they are a monolith.
Right. It's the visual definition of unity. I mean, we desperately want our musical heroes to be a tight-knit family that takes on the world together.
But then you step into the actual backstage reality of the Ramones, and that pristine image just shatters into a million jagged pieces.
Yeah, it really does.
Because we're looking at a dynamic that goes way beyond standard band bickering.
Yeah.
It's honestly brutal.
It might be the most profound example of functional dysfunction in modern music history.
Totally. So welcome to this deep dive. Today we're unpacking a massive stack of materials, everything from vintage 1970s punk rock journalism all the way up to late-breaking, multi-million-dollar legal news from February 2026.
And it's all focused on the undisputed pioneers of punk, the Ramones.
Exactly. Whether you are a die-hard fan who can play every power chord or you're just curious about how modern culture is built, our mission today is to uncover the massive paradox of this band.
Right.
We are going to explore how four outcasts from Queens managed to create a unified global musical revolution, all while secretly enduring decades of vicious internal hatred, physical threats, and literal legal warfare.
Yeah, to really grasp the weight of their legacy and to understand why this 2026 legal settlement is such a monumental shift, we have to go back to a gritty basement in Queens and strip away the cartoon mythology.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because we do often think of the Ramones as a cartoon, four guys who finish each other's musical sentences. But what if the ultimate symbol of punk unity was actually a mirage?
It's a crazy thought.
To understand how they completely rewired music, we have to look at who they were before they put on the uniform. And the first illusion to break is the name.
Right, they weren't brothers.
Not at all. They were middle-class kids from Forest Hills, Queens. Their real names were Thomas Erdelli, John Cummings, Doug Colvin, and Jeffrey Hyman.
And they were profoundly alienated. I mean, these weren't just kids who felt a little misunderstood. They were dealing with severe clinical personal issues.
Right.
Let's look at Jeffrey, who the world knows as Joey Ramone. He was born with a teratoma tumor on his spine.
Wow.
Yeah. He was an incredibly awkward, towering kid dealing with severe obsessive-compulsive disorder. And he had even received a schizophrenia diagnosis.
Which, that completely changes how you view his stage presence.
Totally.
You see footage of him gripping the mic stand, completely rigid, hiding behind his hair. It wasn't just a cool rock pose. It was a coping mechanism for an incredibly vulnerable person dealing with intense psychological weight.
Precisely. The repetitive compulsions of his OCD actually mirror the repetitive, driving nature of their lyrics.
That makes so much sense.
And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have John, who became Johnny Ramone. John was this volatile, deeply angry kid. His father was a strict disciplinarian who once made John pitch a baseball game with a broken toe.
Jesus.
Right. That fostered a rage in John that manifested in terrifying ways. He used to haul heavy television sets up to the roofs of apartment buildings and hurl them onto the street just to watch them explode.
He was a human pressure cooker. And then you throw Doug D. Ramone into the mix. He had this highly chaotic upbringing on military bases in Germany with a volatile family life, and he was already using hard drugs very early on.
Yeah, so you take three deeply damaged, highly combustible teenagers and you put them in a room. It's a recipe for a total meltdown.
It really is.
And it would have been a meltdown if not for Tommy. Thomas Erdelli was the true architect of the Ramones.
Tell me about Tommy, because he's the one who rarely gets the spotlight, but is basically the glue, right?
He is. Tommy was a Hungarian-born audio engineer. His background is entirely different. His parents were Jewish and survived the Holocaust only because their neighbors physically hid them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So Tommy was grounded, practical, and highly technical. He had actually worked in recording studios with Jimi Hendrix. He originally just wanted to manage John and Doug's chaotic little band.
But he ends up playing drums. Wait, why? If he's a producer and a manager, why sit behind the kit?
Because literally no one else could execute his vision.
Really?
Yeah, they held auditions, but every drummer wanted to do fills, use the cymbals, show off. Tommy envisioned a style that was so fast, so stripped down, and so entirely unembellished that no traditional drummer could wrap their head around it.
That's wild.
So Tommy had to do it himself to prove the concept worked.
Which is incredible. And They take the name Ramones from a pseudonym Paul McCartney used to check into hotels, Paul Ramone.
Right, yeah.
And they start playing at CBGB in the Bowery in August 1974. New York City at this time is bankrupt, gritty, and dangerous. And the Ramones reflect that perfectly.
It's absolutely.
Hilly Kristal, the owner of CBGB, initially thought they were a total disaster. They would play a 17-minute set and spend 9 of those minutes just screaming at each other, tuning their guitars, and stopping mid-song.
They were raw, and they were trying very hard to be provocative. In those early days, they were drafting shock value lyrics. They had lines in early song drafts like, I'm a Nazi Schatz.
Right. And just to pause here for a second as a reminder, we are strictly reporting the historical text from our sources here. We are definitely not endorsing any political imagery or viewpoints.
Exactly, just stating the historical facts of their early drafts.
Yeah. But Seymour Stein, the head of their record label, who was Jewish, stepped in immediately and said, no, we are changing that.
Yeah, he shut it down.
It highlights how naive they were about the historical weight of that imagery and how necessary that practical intervention was from the label to save them from their own provocation.
It was pure naivety. They were just throwing things at the wall.
But here's what I don't get. People frame them as these bumbling 3-chord amateurs who couldn't play their instruments.
Yeah.
But the irony is, they didn't set out to invent punk rock. They genuinely wanted to be a bubblegum pop band. They loved the Bay City Rollers. They loved 1960s girl groups and surf rock. So the decision to strip away the 10-minute blues solos of the 1970s wasn't because they were musical idiots. It was a highly calculated avant-garde choice engineered by Tommy.
That is the crucial distinction. Tommy knew exactly what he was doing. By removing the guitar solos, the synthesizer intros, the meandering bridges, he focused the band entirely on pure aggressive rhythm.
Yeah.
He and Johnny locked in together. The guitar and the drums moving at breakneck speed. It felt primitive, but it was precision engineered.
And that precision is what accidentally ignited the entire world.
Yeah.
Because even though they couldn't get commercial radio play in the United States, that stripped-down formula crossed the ocean and it essentially wrote the DNA for entirely new genres of music.
Oh, without a doubt. Let's look at the mechanics of their 1976 debut album, the self-titled Ramones. They recorded the entire thing in a single week.
A week?
1 week. It cost $6,400. That is an absurdly low budget, which meant no overdubs, no studio trickery, just 4 guys playing live in a room, all 14 tracks clocked in under 2 minutes and 35 seconds.
It's an auditory blitzkrieg. And the true explosion happens on July 4th, 1976 at the Roundhouse venue in London. This gig is widely considered ground zero for the UK punk movement.
The scene outside that venue is legendary. Joe Strummer, who would soon front The Clash, and members of the Sex Pistols couldn't even get tickets.
No way.
Yeah, they were locked out in a back alley. They were so desperate to see this American band that they threw a rock at the backstage window.
You're kidding.
Nope. Johnny Ramone sticks his head out, sees these scruffy British kids, and the Ramones literally form a human chain to physically haul the future of UK punk rock inside through the broken window.
That is the ultimate passing of the torch. Hauling the Clash through a shattered window. I love that.
It's iconic.
But I want to pivot here because the UK punk connection makes sense. What blows my mind is how a band playing 2-minute songs about sniffing glue and high school romance accidentally writes the blueprint for 1980s thrash metal.
It's a huge leap.
How does that leap even happen?
It comes down entirely to the physical mechanics of Johnny's guitar playing. Traditional rock guitarists use alternate picking, strumming down, then up, then down, then up. It has a natural swing to it. Johnny Ramone refused to strum up.
Wait, downstrokes? Like only hitting down?
Only aggressive, rapid-fire downstrokes.
Okay, what does that actually do to the sound? Why does that matter?
Because when you only strike down, your guitar pick hits the heaviest, thickest bass strings, the E and the A strings first, every single time. It creates a relentless, percussive chugging sound.
Oh.
It sounds like a chainsaw. To play eighth notes at 200 beats per minute using only downstrokes requires athletic endurance. It causes severe wrist cramping, but it creates a wall of pure driving force.
So when early crowds described their shows as a constant barrage of noise, it was because Johnny was literally turning his guitar into a percussion instrument.
Exactly. And that aggressive, high-speed downstroke technique is the literal DNA of thrash metal. In the 80s, you see bands like Metallica, Anthrax, and Motorhead taking that exact physical technique and applying it to heavier distortion.
Wow.
Yeah, they all covered the Ramones or wrote tribute songs to them because they recognized exactly where the blueprint came from.
Even beyond the playing, they impacted the vocals and the aesthetic. Paul Di'Anno, the original frontman for Iron Maiden, cited Joey Ramone as having the most recognizable voice in rock.
Really?
Yeah. Joey's weird, hiccuping melodic drawl showed metal vocalists that you didn't have to sing like an opera star to command a room. And the Ramones completely changed the uniform.
Oh, the leather jackets.
Right before them, heavy metal bands looked like they were going to a disco. Flared pants, fringe, glitter. The Ramones walked out in scruffy denim jeans, plain T-shirts, and cheap leather motorcycle jackets.
Yeah.
They made the street-level uniform the standard.
They proved you didn't need to be a virtuoso, and you didn't need a massive wardrobe budget to create music with immense visceral power.
But here is the tragedy of it all. They're inspiring stadium-filling metal bands. They're launching a cultural revolution in London, but back home, the Ramones still couldn't get a song on commercial radio to save their lives.
They were struggling.
Desperate for a hit. And that desperation leads them into the arms of a legendary pop producer, which triggers what I can only describe as a psychological hostage situation.
Oh man, you're talking about the recording of their 1980 album, End of the Century. The record label brought in Phil Spector.
Which sounds like a good idea on paper, right? Joey loved 1960s girl groups, and Spector produced the Ronettes. But the reality was a nightmare. Explain the clash here. Why didn't Phil Spector's style work with punk?
Because Phil Spector was famous for the wall of sound. The mechanics of that involve putting dozens of musicians in a room, 3 pianos, 5 acoustic guitars, a horn section recording them all at once, and washing the entire track in heavy studio reverb and echo.
Sounds expensive.
It creates a dense symphonic roar. But punk rock, by definition, relies on dry, separated, abrasive space. You need to hear the crack of the snare and the scrape of the guitar string. Spector wanted to drown the Ramones in an orchestra.
And beyond the musical mismatch, by 1980, Spector was erratic, deeply paranoid, and heavily armed in the studio.
Yes. The recording sessions were psychological torture. Spector made Johnny play the opening G major chord of Rock and Roll High School over and over again for hours on end.
Hours. Just one chord.
Just the opening chord, screaming profanities at him over the studio monitors, refusing to let them move on to the rest of the song.
It's just mind games.
Yeah.
But the absolute peak of this insanity is the recording of Baby I Love You, which was a cover of a Ronettes original. Spector reportedly pulled a gun on the band in his Beverly Hills mansion.
It's terrifying.
He forced them to sit there and listen to the song on repeat until 4:30 in the morning at gunpoint.
The fallout from that night was absolute rebellion. The rest of the band, Johnny, Dee Dee, and Marky, who had taken over drumming duties by then, completely refused to play on the track. They walked out.
I don't blame him.
So only Joey's vocals were used. If you listen to that recording, he is singing over hired session musicians and this massive, gooey string section.
It's like taking a bare-knuckle street fight and trying to choreograph it for a Broadway musical. Spector drowned their aggressive, dry downstrokes in these massive, wet, orchestral echoes.
Yeah, completely changed their sound.
People sometimes argue that Spector elevated the band because that album was actually their biggest commercial chart success in the UK. But I cannot buy that narrative.
Yeah.
He didn't elevate them. He essentially held punk rock hostage so he could relive his own 1960s glory days.
I agree. It fundamentally betrayed the identity Tommy and Johnny had built. But, you know, the tension with Spector was a minor skirmish compared to the nuclear war that was rotting the band from the inside.
Right. We have to talk about the love triangle. Because losing control in the recording studio mirrored the complete loss of control in their personal lives. This leads to one of the most brutal personal feuds in the history of music.
It's heartbreaking. Joey had a girlfriend named Linda Danielle. She eventually joined the band on tour. And Johnny, who, remember, was the band's harsh disciplinarian, a guy who would actually punch his bandmates if they played a wrong chord on stage, ended up stealing Linda from Joey.
And not just a brief affair. Johnny and Linda moved in together, and they eventually got married. She became Linda Ramone.
Joey was entirely devastated. I mean, it completely shattered him. He channeled that intense betrayal into his songwriting, which resulted in tracks like "The KKK Took My Baby Away."
I want you, the listener, to really put yourself in this scenario. Imagine going to work every single day, and your job requires you to stand exactly 2 feet away from the person who stole the love of your life and broke your heart.
Yeah.
And you have to play perfectly synchronized, high-speed, aggressive music with them. You can't miss a beat. You have to look at them.
And you aren't just doing this in an office. You are traveling in a cramped, un-air-conditioned van from city to city year after year. There were no smartphones to stare at and ignore each other, just pure seething silence.
It's suffocating just thinking about it.
The staggering reality is that Joey and Johnny essentially did not speak a single word to each other for roughly 15 years.
15 years of silence.
Yes. Yet, despite that blinding hatred, they completed 2,263 live shows before finally disbanding in 1996. The level of psychological compartmentalization required to do that is terrifying.
It is a tragic endurance test. And the aftermath of the band breaking up is just as heartbreaking. All 4 original members passed away in incredibly quick succession.
They really did.
Joey died of lymphoma in 2001, and Johnny refused to visit him on his deathbed. Dee Dee died of a drug overdose the very next year in 2002. Johnny passed away from prostate cancer in 2004. And Tommy, the original architect, died of bile duct cancer in 2014.
It was a total devastating wipeout of the original lineup in just over a decade, and the bitterness lasted right up to the final breath.
Yeah, you look at the 2002 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. Joey had just passed away. Johnny steps up to the mic, and what does he do? He thanks President Bush.
Wow.
And again, we aren't here to dissect early 2000s politics or take a stance. We're just reporting the historical quote. But just purely as a visual, you have Johnny making this highly specific, polarizing statement to the crowd, while Joey's award sits completely unclaimed and silent on the podium right next to him. It's a devastating encapsulation of the divide.
The tragedy is that even death didn't end the fighting, because the fractured relationships of the living band members translated directly into a messy, decades-long legal war over their estate.
Which brings us right up to the breaking news from February 2026. How does a feud between dead band members continue to paralyze a legacy?
It comes down to a state law. Since 2005, the Ramones' intellectual property, their music, the merchandising, the iconic logo was split exactly 50-50. Half belonged to Joey's brother, Mickey Lee, and the other half belonged to Johnny's widow, Linda Cummings Ramone.
Wait, a 50-50 split? How does anything ever get approved if the 2 people representing the 2 men who hated each other the most both have veto power? That's mutual destruction.
That's exactly what it was. Think of it like a nuclear launch key system where both generals absolutely despise each other. If one turns the key and the other refuses, the missile stays in the silo.
That's a great analogy.
This 50-50 split led to years of bitter arbitration. There were lawsuits over how the band's social media accounts were being used. Major lucrative projects were completely blocked. There was a highly anticipated Netflix biopic in development that was supposed to star Pete Davidson as Joey Ramone.
Oh, I heard about that.
Yeah, it was halted because they couldn't reach mutual consent.
But this deadlock finally broke. In a massive development just reported in early 2026, Linda bought out Mickey Lee's remaining 50% stake. She now has 100% control over the band's entire catalog, their name, and their image.
The timing is incredibly poignant, too. This consolidation of power coincides almost exactly with the 50th anniversary of their debut single, Blitzkrieg Bop, which dropped in February 1976.
Yeah.
Right. By removing the 50-50 deadlock, this legal resolution finally allows the Ramones' legacy to be marketed and preserved without that constant, suffocating internal obstruction.
To me, this 2026 legal buyout is like the final chord of a Ramones song. It's abrupt, it's decisive, and honestly, it is decades overdue.
Duh.
But you have to appreciate the profound irony here.
Oh, completely.
The ultimate punk rock legacy, born out of angry misfits in a gritty New York basement, is now finally secured and stabilized through a corporate buyout and binding legal term sheets.
It is deeply ironic, but in the modern music industry, it's really the only way to protect what they built. We've traced this unbelievable journey, from outcast kids in Queens dealing with severe trauma to unwilling pioneers who created the rhythmic blueprint for heavy metal and UK punk.
Yeah.
They survived Phil Spector holding a gun on them, and they survived 15 years of silent, bitter hatred for each other in a touring band.
And they finally found peace in a 2026 boardroom. It is a wild, exhausting ride. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
Think about the Ramones' iconic logo, the one printed on 1 million t-shirts around the globe. It's that mock presidential seal with the 4 names Johnny, Joey, Dee Dee, Tommy written in a perfect unbroken circle.
Right.
It implies a perfect unbreakable brotherhood. Knowing what you know now about the 15 years of silence, the stolen girlfriend, the physical threats, and the decades of legal warfare, does the fact that they fake that unity night after night for the sake of the music make them massive hypocrites? Or does it make them the most dedicated, hardworking professionals in the history of rock and roll?
That tension right there is the ultimate paradox of the Ramones. It's what makes them endlessly fascinating.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Go pull up those classic 2-minute records today, but this time, listen to them with this fresh, complicated perspective. I guarantee you will hear that constant barrage of noise a little differently.